Do you have tight ankles? When you squat down, do your heels pop up off the ground? When you're running, especially when you're tired, do your feet start to dump, to pronate to the inside? If so, you might need to work on the dorsiflexion of your ankles. Hey, my name's Lucas. I am a yoga teacher. I'm a teacher trainer. I have struggled myself with tight ankles, specifically that dorsiflexion range, most of my life. And if you're like me, you've tried all these weird videos online with slant boards and boxes and rubber bands and tying up your legs. Not sure about you, but all I ended up with is sore knees, and I didn't really make any progress in my ankles. If you can relate, this video is for you. In this video, we'll chat about the anatomy of your ankles. We'll talk about the risks of having tight ankles, why it can be such a problem. Talk about some of the common mistakes that people make when they're stretching. And lastly, we'll go over 3 poses that are very, very effective for safely and effectively opening up your ankles, specifically in this dorsiflexion range. Quick note here, if you're interested in plantar flexion, that's pointing your toes like this, please check the main YouTube channel. We'll be updating videos on that range. For today, we'll be focused on dorsiflexion only. As always, there's a PDF guide down below if you'd like to skip ahead and grab the poses that we'll be covering in this video. Let's start off by looking at the anatomy of your ankle joint. The first thing you need to appreciate is that this joint is an engineering marvel. Just imagine every time you're running and striding, we're talking about hundreds of pounds of pressure. Slam, slam, slam. It's an engineering miracle that your foot and ankle don't explode with every stride. So let's just take a moment to appreciate the ankle joint. Here's what we've got. Our tibia comes down the front. That's your shin bone. You can palpate yours as we're talking here. That's your shin bone coming down. On the lateral backside, we have your fibula, a smaller but important supporting bone of your lower leg. And these 2 bones come down and they articulate with a bone, a weird floating bone called your talus. Now I call it a floating bone in air quotes because it's not really floating. It's wrapped in ligaments, but it does float between your lower leg and your foot and your heel. We talk about the ankle joint as if it's just one joint, but truly it's a combination of joints. We have the place where your lower leg meets that talus, that floating bone, but also where your talus meets your calcaneus, your heel bone, and also where that talus articulates with the bones of your lower foot as well. Now, the surfaces of these bones are covered in something called articular cartilage. If you imagine like a chicken drumstick, if you were to pull it out, that slippery white stuff on the chicken bone, that's articular cartilage. You have chicken bone cartilage too. It's right here, and you have quite a bit of it, about 1/4 of an inch of articular cartilage. This is a synovial hinge joint, like a lot of other joints in the body, but it's unique in that it has this weird mortise and tenon structure. And this mortise and tenon structure has been used in carpentry for hundreds of years. From an engineering perspective, it's very, very strong. It's the only joint like this in the body. It needs to be this way so it can take that tremendous load, that tremendous pressure. So we're talking about ankle mobility. We look at the bones, we look at the structure here, and when we talk about opening up our ankle joint, what does that mean? Does that mean we take a screwdriver? Does that mean no. When we talk about loosening up joints, what we really mean are the muscles that limit the range of motion. Sometimes people get confused trying to stretch tendons, trying to stretch ligaments. Bad idea. We want to stretch muscles. And when you look at dorsiflexion of your ankle, the muscles involved from an anatomical perspective are upstream of your ankle, specifically from our Achilles tendon, which we don't stretch. We get into your soleus, your gastrocnemius, and then there's a weird little sinewy one called plantaris. These 3 muscles, soleus, gastrocnemius, and plantaris, they're largely responsible for the ability of your ankle to dorsiflex or not. To dorsiflex or not. Couple of things about these muscles. The gastrocnemius actually crosses the knee joint, which means it's involved a little bit in knee flexion. It's part of the reason it gets really tight, as does your plantaris, but that's a much smaller muscle. Okay, so we've got tight ankles. We understand it's these tight muscles. Who really cares, right? I put my shoes on, nobody can really tell. Well, here's why you should care. If you lack range of motion here, the problem is going to translate downstream or upstream. What downstream usually means is it could result in plantar fasciitis. If you lack range of motion at your ankle, you can make up for it by overstressing your plantar fascia. And if you've never had plantar fasciitis, it feels like you're stepping on nails right here when you wake up in the morning. I'd highly encourage you to avoid it. As we move upstream, if you lack dorsiflexion, you can overstress your Achilles tendon. Achilles tendinopathy, tendinitis, very, very common. As you go upstream, knee problems are very common. You could aggravate your patellar tendon, your quadriceps tendon. There's even a correlation between tight ankles and ACL injuries, which is a major, major injury you want to avoid. Okay, so now we understand that tight ankles are a problem. We want to fix it, not just so we can squat, but so we can take care of the safety of our body, both downstream and upstream. But here's a question. Why the heck are our ankles so tight anyways? I mean, what's the problem? We're walking all the time. It seems like we're using our ankles. You certainly are. But the number one problem is look down at your feet. I'm not wearing shoes, but probably you are. Those shoes you're wearing have an elevated heel. How do I know? Because 95% of all shoes everywhere in the world, Nike trainers, Reebok shoes, cowboy boots, high-heeled shoes, you name it, they have an elevated heel to toe ratio. That might be 4 centimeters. It might be 6, 8 centimeters. It might be these crazy Nike Vaporflies that are way up here. But what happens is when you wear a shoe from the age of, 5, 6, 8 years old, all the way to where you are now with an elevated heel, those important calf muscles get shortened and tightened. To help you think about this, let's imagine my arm, which is in full extension right now. Let's imagine I was wearing a slightly elevated Nike running shoe since I was 8 years old, and my arm was slightly bent. Well, my biceps now are slightly shortened. Age 8, age 12, age 20, age 30. Now at age 30, I decide I want to go do a CrossFit WOD, and I can't squat. Let me see if I can. Nope, I cannot. Why? Because my foot has been in a weird elevated heel position for decades. I mention this because you need to understand you've probably spent decades shortening your calf muscles. It's going to take more than a couple of days to open them back up. Now, the second reason, also important, is that we move in ways that are totally unnatural in our modern world, which means we almost never squat down. In any kind of natural living setting, we would be squatting to poo, squatting to clean our clothes, squatting to gather water, to do dishes. Probably, cumulatively, we'd spend at least 30 minutes in a full squat every day. Full squat, dorsiflexion, we're not doing it, we're missing it. Okay, so what's the deal? There's tons of calf stretches. Why don't we just go out there and stretch? Well, here's the challenge. Most of the calf stretches are a big problem, and I'll share with you why. Number one thing that people do is they lift their heel up when they're stretching. Well, I can still feel a stretch. You can, but from a physics perspective, if our leverage point is, instead of being here with our heel down, if it's here, suddenly the intensity of that stretch goes into your plantar fascia, your Achilles, and then into your calf muscles. Does it stretch your calves? Yeah, but not very well. Number two problem that we have when we're stretching our calf muscles is we have really poor leverage. What do I mean by that? Let's imagine I want to stretch my hamstrings. Look how big my torso is. I can get really great leverage on my hamstrings, right? If I put my arms out even more, I can really feel that. We just have this little teeny leverage point here. It's very, very difficult, which means we need to get that heel down. So with that little teeny lever that we have, we can still get some crank on our calf muscles. If my foot was really long out here, if I had a broomstick for leverage, it'd be a lot easier. This is part of the challenge. When people do calf stretches, they very often bounce. This is another challenge. That bouncing can be good for strength. It can be good for positively stressing these tissues. It's not going to help with flexibility. The final reason stretches don't work, many people don't realize that your soleus is type 1, slow twitch muscles primarily, but your gastrocnemius up here is primarily type 2, fast twitch muscles. Fast twitch muscles have a very, very high stretch reflex. Stretch reflex is when the muscle spindles inside of your muscles that communicate directly to your spinal cord. They don't even talk to your brain, they just go straight to your spinal cord. And what they say is, Lucas, be careful, you're going to break your ankle. Lucas, be careful, you're going to sprain your ankle. And they tense up, tense up, tense up. You felt that stretch reflex before, maybe in a forward bend, where you feel like your body's fighting you. This is an innate response that we have to override. How do we override it? With long, hold, passive stretches, and almost nobody's doing that. They're bouncing around, they're not spending enough time, you're fighting your nervous system for 30 seconds, you haven't actually affected the soft tissues at all. So if those are the problems with stretching, what are the best practices? Number one, heel down all the time, get your leverage point here so that your stretch can move up here. Number two, we need to hold things for a long time. How long do we need to hold them for? 2 minutes per pose. And number 3, you need to do this after, not before anything explosive. I'm going to say that again. Do not do these stretches before you lift weights. Do not do these stretches before you go for a run. It will feel good. It is not safe or appropriate. I'm not sure why there's a lot of confusion about this, but deep stretching should be done after, not before. The published literature is conclusive. I have a bunch of videos on this if you'd like to check it out. When we're doing this type of mobilization work, your joint will feel and should feel a little bit wobbly for 2 to 3 hours. Do this after. Ideally do this in the night. Wake up the next day, and little by little, you'll gain mobility in your ankles. Let's take a look at the poses. The first pose we'll do here is a straight leg runner's lunge. You need a wall. I'm using this weird mirrored wall, but I'd encourage you just to use whatever wall you have. You'll need a timer, 2 minutes. Start the timer, and let's get into the pose. I'll place my forearms on the wall. My back leg is my left leg in this case. It needs to be all the way straight with my heel down. My front leg I want to be completely worthless, meaning I'll pop up on my toes, or I'll turn my foot on its side. It doesn't really matter. I want to take 90% of the weight into my heel in the back side. Remember, we chatted about the most common mistake people make when stretching their calves is they lift their heel up. Make sure you ground down, drive the weight down into your back heel, and breathe here. My front leg again is totally light and worthless. All the pressure is going back into my back heel. When we do these science of stretching poses, we use a very specific breathing technique. We inhale through our nose for 4. Exhale through your mouth to the count of 8. As we spoke about earlier, your stretch reflex in your calf muscles is very, very strong. This breathing exercise helps it turn off the stretch reflex and allows you to go deeper into the pose, actually affecting your muscles, not just fighting your nervous system. As much as you can, relax your calf muscles. It's easier said than done, but try to press into the wall. Relax your calf muscles, drive the weight back into your heel. The third thing to keep in mind is your time. 2-minute holds are necessary so we can overcome that stretch reflex and actually start to affect some change. Good. Release your leg. We'll switch sides. 2-minute timer. This time my right leg is back, my left leg is forward. Press your forearms into the wall. Your front leg should be pretty much useless. Kick the weight back into your heel and breathe here. So the 3 principles of practice in order. Number 1 is wet noodle. And wet noodle teaches us that our muscles, they stretch best when fully relaxed. So if I think of my calf muscles like wet noodles, they certainly don't feel like wet noodles, but I try to think of them that way. That'll help me to relax deeper into the pose. Principle number 2 is called breathe to relax. And when I use this specific breathing pattern, in for 4 through my nose, out for 8 through my mouth, it helps to reduce my stretch reflex and allows me to go deeper in the pose. The third principle is one of the most often overlooked, and it's called time under passive tension. In this pose, we're aiming for 2 minutes, and 2 minutes is kind of our baseline for any kind of pose that gives us enough time to overcome our nervous system and enough time to actually affect change in those calf muscles. Remember here in this straight leg version, we're targeting our gastrocnemius muscles, the upper calf muscles, and our plantaris, that smaller but relevant little muscle that also crosses the knee joint. When our leg is straight, our gastroc gets stretched. When our knee is bent, it's mostly our soleus. We're at 2 minutes. Let's release and shake it out. We'll now do a bent leg version specifically for our soleus. This is called a wall lunge. So as the name suggests, I'll have the wall in front of me. My back foot, I drop my heel on the ground like a warrior pose from yoga. With your foot, have it just a couple of inches from the wall. And I'd like you to bend your knee past your toe, hit the wall, and then pause here for a moment. We'll talk a little bit about alignment. My goal here is to keep my knee stable, hence the wall. My back heel's down so that I can relax into the pose more. Relax should be in air quotes. This is an intense pose. I can rest my arms on top of the leg, but I want to drive the weight down, down, down into my heel here. A couple of things to think about. Don't let your knee dump to the inside. Take your fingers, you can poke around back here. You should feel your soleus muscle nice and tight under tension. If you don't feel it under tension, you can scoot your foot a little further back. I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. If your heel is popping up off the ground, it's a no-go. Scoot your feet more closer towards the wall. If you don't feel much tension, you could pull your foot a little bit further away from the wall. And again, drive down into your heel. This is going to get really intense really quickly. If it's too intense, you could put your fingers on the floor for support. Just be careful that your knee doesn't drop to the inside. The key thing is that the weight is heavy, heavy down into your heel so that we can drive that stretch from that leverage point up into your soleus muscle specifically. Let's get back to our breathing. Inhale for 4. Exhale 8. The role of the wall here is simply to stabilize. It helps you to stay safer and helps you to avoid putting excess strain on your knee. Is it necessary? No, you could do it without the wall. In fact, we'll do a variation here in a moment. But especially when you're starting, this variation can be really, really helpful for keeping your knee stable and supported. It can also help you to focus on driving the weight down into your heel. Let's switch sides. So again, start off with your foot at whatever distance, usually about 4 fingers distance from the wall is a good starting point. My back heel is down. I'll start my timer and then I'll sink my knee toward the wall. Take a minute to find your alignment here and we'll breathe into our left side. If you feel your quad working too much, again, you can drop your fingers down onto the floor. You could place your hands on top of your knee. Imagine your left heel, so your front heel, is as heavy as possible. Drive the weight down into that heel. That'll get you the best soleus stretch possible. So a good sign that you're getting fatigued is that you're unable to do that exhale for 8, in which case you can put one hand down on the floor for support, continue to drive that weight, scoop my foot a little bit further from the wall, driving the weight down into my heel, breathing here. And slowly release. You can punch out that stretch. Move into our final stretch, which is a banded lunge. The banded lunge, again, is targeting our soleus muscle. And we'll start off by putting the band right around our lower ankle on our right foot. Then I'll put the band across the arch of my back foot, and I'll pull the band up on top of my shoulder. If you don't have a rubber band like this, they're very inexpensive. It's an exercise band. You can also use a fixed strap, but the rubber band works better. I'll separate my feet until I get some nice tension on my ankle, and then I'll lunge forward with my knee moving directly over my big toe, and I'll hold here. This type of banded stretch has been used in research, and some people theorize that the band is actually pulling that floating talus bone backwards. Personally, I don't think that's what's happening. I think the advantage here of having the band is it drives your heel down, which gives you an even better leverage point to access your soleus, but who knows? My feeling is that any kind of pressure that a rubber band could put is negligible compared to the pressure that you would get from, for example, running 3 kilometers or doing hill sprints. In this pose, if you feel comfortable, you can allow your knee to move out over your big toe, but just make sure it doesn't dump to the inside. Keep your knee tracking over the big toe, and if anything, it can even move a little bit to the outside. Big toe mound stays down, your breath stays steady. In for 4. Out for 8. Just like in our previous pose, if you find your quads fatigue, you can lift for a moment, but keep principle number 3, keep that tension on your ankle, and you can ease back into the pose. If you needed to, you could also use that wall again to alleviate a little bit of pressure. Your right quads can get pretty frazzle fried here. So if that's the case, give yourself support, but continue to drive the weight down into your heel on the front side. Good, slowly release. Let's get rid of this band. Again, if you don't have a band, the wall stretch that we just did a moment ago, the wall lunge, is a perfectly fine alternative. I'll hook the band around my lower ankle, separate my feet until I'm in a lunge stance. I like to pull the band up over my shoulder, hit start on my 2-minute timer, and off we go again. You might find that you need to wiggle or adjust to find the pose. Totally fine, but let's keep tension throughout. If and when we feel comfortable, we'll start to allow my knee to move forward over my big toe. And again, the main purpose of the band, my theory, is to keep that heel driving down. When your heel's driving down, the stretch goes up into the muscle, which is what we're looking for. Just want to reiterate here, these stretches are meant to be done after, not before training. You should never do this before deep squats, should never do this before going for a run. If you do it before a gentle workout, that's fine, but keep in mind, for a period now of about 2 to 3 hours, you're going to have some joint laxity in that ankle, and you're going to have weakness in your lower leg. This is by design, it's not permanent. This is the signaling you've been telling your body. In order to affect change, it's necessary, but you need to respect the timing of these exercises and use them appropriately. Again, if you start to feel fatigue, like I am, put your fist on the wall. That can give you a little bit of extra support. Continue to drive the weight back into your heel. If you need to give your quads a break, you can lift and then back in, heavy down into your heel, getting that really intense stretch in your soleus muscle. And slowly release out of this. So if you found those poses really challenging, So did I. You can see my legs were shaking, I'm sweating. They're really difficult poses. Remember, you've spent years, in many cases decades, tightening up your calf muscles. These are big, strong muscles. It's going to take some energy and some effort to open them up. Please remember, these are for after a workout, not before. Hope you found this video helpful. If you'd like more science-based yoga videos, please hit subscribe down below. There's a PDF down below if you'd like these poses in a worksheet format. I answer all my own questions and comments down below, so if you have comments, please drop them down below. Lastly, you can find my teaching schedule at yogabody.com. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.